Shalom, WJC family. Chag Sameach. It is the week of Sukkot, and I wanted to share with you some Torah that I shared this past Sunday on the second day of Yom Tov Sukkot. Sukkot is a holiday about vulnerability. Right? We live in this temporary dwelling with a holy roof and sides that don't really keep the wind out. It's a reminder to us of that we're vulnerable and that no matter how much control we wish we had, it's all really in God's hands. So by subjecting ourselves to the elements, we recognize that we're dependent on God. Unfortunately, this year, we don't need reminders that we're vulnerable. In fact, I don't know about you, but when it became clear on Friday that the President of the United States had contracted COVID, regardless of how you feel about him or your politics, love him, dislike him, on a personal level, it made me feel vulnerable. Like if he could get it, anybody could get it, which, of course, rationally I knew before, but something changed for me spiritually. And so in addressing this feeling that I suspect many of us have in the age of the pandemic, I want to talk about a different aspect of Sukkot, and that is Sukkot as a festival of water, which is another level of the holiday. And it's very important, and I think it can tell us something about this vulnerable feeling we may have. So on Sukkot, we leave the Torah mantles white all the way until the second to last day of the holiday, Hoshana Rabbah, because we say that judgment continues through Sukkot, often as an opportunity for us to get our last licks of tshuva in, of repentance in. But actually, on Sukkot, it's said that we're judged on water, we're judged on the rain. This is because this is the time of year when rain is about to start in the land of Israel, the land that is the land of our forefathers, the land that has this special nature between us and God. And I want to talk about the land and that special nature and rain because it's going to give us some insight about vulnerability. So essential is this idea that rain in the land of Israel is integral to our relationship with God, that even to this day, on Shmini Atzeret, on the last day of Sukkot, we still begin saying a prayer for rain, Mashiv Haruach Umorid Hagashem, in our Amidah. Now, for the last 70-some years, yes, that we've been sovereign in Israel, so maybe we say it for Israelis living there. But for 2,000 years of exile, we still said it because there's something theological about this water-based relationship. And we read about it every day also, all year round, in the Shema, specifically in the second paragraph of the Shema. You see, the biblical relationship with God, between God and the Jewish people, is based on whether or not it rains. And it can be hard to talk about this because it sounds primitive. Right? This relationship that if we're good, it rains, and if we're not good, it won't, doesn't sound like a very theologically deep or sophisticated approach to our relationship with God. And yet, that is exactly the core of the biblical relationship with God. Right? God takes us out of Egypt. What makes Egypt a special place, what makes it one of the cradles of human civilization, is it has this big, beautiful river, the Nile, and every year, whether it rains a lot or it doesn't rain at all, the Nile River floods. And if you are clever enough to build an irrigation channel, then you can have watered crops whether it rains or not. God takes us out of Egypt and brings us to the land of Canaan, later to be known as the land of Israel, where there is no river that floods, where we'll be dependent completely on the rain, on systems of cisterns to collect rainwater and make sure we have rain all through the hot months, because it only rains starting now and for a few months of the year. What kind of God? Is that a favor for us? If God was trying to redeem us, should have left us in Egypt with the Nile that floods and sent the Egyptians to the land of Canaan to be dependent on the rain. Except the gift that God gives us can only be in the land of Israel, can only be in a land dependent on the rain. And that's why in the second paragraph of the Shema, we read, every time we read it, in the V'haya im Shemoa paragraph, right? If you do as I say, I will favor your land with rain at the proper season, in autumn and spring, and you'll have ample harvest of grain, etc., etc. But if you follow other gods, Adonai's wrath will be directed against you. God will close the heavens and hold back the rain. We still say that to this day. So what's so important about it? By bringing us to the land of Israel, by ensuring that we are vulnerable in the land of Israel, dependent on whether or not it will rain, God builds a relationship with the Jewish people that is not possible under any other circumstances. Right? The relationship that is created by God and the Jewish people in Israel, because it is dependent on the rain, is not possible under any other circumstances. Why? Because relationships take two things. They take trust, and they take the ability to overcome disappointment. All relationships require trust and the ability to trust even after we've disappointed one another. And so, with this model of rain in the promised land, God builds such a relationship dependent on trust. We have to trust that the rains will come, and some years they don't. Some years, even when we believe we've been as good as we could possibly be, the rains don't come. And then we're disappointed. We're disappointed in God. And of course, vice versa. Plenty of years we don't live up to our side of the bargain. And sometimes the rains come anyway. That is the fabric of the relationship. And it's important because it's the fabric of all relationships. All relationships have to be able to overcome disappointment because everyone will always disappoint us. We read about that in the Psalm for the season of repentance, which we also continue saying through Hoshana Rabbah, through the end of Sukkot. Right? In it, one of the lines that I find hardest to deal with, Ki avi ve'imi azavuni Adonai yasfeni. Right? Because my mother and my father, they will abandon me, but Adonai will care for me. Now, what is this talking about? Mothers and fathers, under good circumstances, don't abandon their children. What does it mean they will abandon me? Well, because under normal circumstances, parents die before their children. Of course, that's not abandoning them in the way that we think. It really doesn't say abandon me. It says they will leave me. My mother and father will leave me, but Adonai will care for me. And of course, every parent, although we want to be around as long as we can, we hope our children will outlive us, God willing. Ask any parent where it didn't work out that way, and I have, unfortunately, and they'll tell you the same, or spoken with them, I haven't asked. They'll tell you the same. But that means that at some point we're going to be alone without our parents' protection. And the truth is, that's nobody's fault. It's just the nature of relationships that sometimes we're disappointed in each other. And for a relationship to be healthy, for it to thrive, we need to have the trust, the loving basis to survive those times. And ultimately, God gives us that kind of relationship in both directions by giving us a land dependent on the rain, by giving us a relationship based on the water. God gives us a relationship based on trust and sometimes based on disappointment. Despite the psalm that says, even though my parents will leave me, God will care for me. We know that God is, if we want to be in a real, genuine relationship with God, it needs to have room for disappointment as well. And that is what this holiday is all about. It's not only about being vulnerable, although it is. It's also about how relationships can be strengthened during times of vulnerability. Even when we can't fix things for each other, even when sometimes we might be a little bit the cause of each other's discomfort. When the love is there and when the trust is there, it doesn't matter as much that we're so vulnerable. It's an important lesson for this moment as well. We all feel vulnerable in the time of a pandemic, maybe more this week like me than other times, or maybe no different. But vulnerability is part of our conversation. And just like we learn from this holiday of Sukkot, from its celebration of water and judgment based on water, that what gets us through our times of feeling vulnerable are trusting, loving relationships, so too now is the time to maintain our relationships, to infuse them with love, to give the benefit of the doubt one more time and infuse them with trust. That is part of our tshuva as well. It is very much what Sukkot is about with God, and I hope it inspires us all to work on those relationships with the people in our lives who we love, who we depend on, that might need a little work. Because when we do, when those relationships are strong, when that love is strong and tended to, it doesn't matter how vulnerable we actually are, we will feel the ability to hold up in the wind, just like we hope our Sukkot do in the wind and the rain every year at this time of year. I wish you a Chag Sameach. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. I wish you healthy, loving relationships and a feeling of strength and resolution in the storm we are now experiencing.